This narrative may sound like science fiction.
But the special part of it is, behind that system.
Where does that leave free will? Because we all think we have a choice whether to do things or not to do things.
It's like somewhere along the line I got brainwashed or something.
The transmitter goes up to the satellite. Old technology, nothing special.
This podcast is the real story about how the Dutch Secret Service practices on Dutch civilians. Innocent people that are being used like test rabbits. And I'm one of them. My name is Raymond and I'm making this podcast. Mind you, my personal and thrilling story starts at 8 minutes and would be wonderful if you go with me. Earlier episode, I tell you that the Secret Service has been working on mind control techniques for more than 60 years. And that it is possible to communicate with me without hearable sound. My nerves can be approached. But I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a test rabbit, and you may take this literally. The technique is being tested and enhanced with me as test figure. Without my permission, products are administered to me with help of injections and gas, and at least once I am sedated with a sleeping agent. To continue my story, I will make a jump, because the Secret Service also used me to practice with well-known methods and techniques, like to track a person, to follow and to intercept, and to take out a person. They practice together with European partners. I am not an agent from the secret agency. I never worked for them. I am a normal civilian. And what is happening with me is completely illegal. But the importance for the state is of greater value than to recognize my rights as civilian. Before they started with mind control experiments, they ordered me often to, as they say, "You need to come in." I also mentioned that in my police report. I had to step inside, but where? I had not a clue. The Dutch AIVD even waited me up in Amsterdam with 2 people, and they shouted to me to come with them. How that involved I will tell you in the next episode. But for now we go back to France. Episode 2, Coercion. Before I make this jump in time, I would like to tell you something about your brain and dreams. My personal story is coming. The Dutch Secret Service is working at an interrogation method in which they are asking questions during your sleep. They use low sound waves to trigger your nerves and trigger them with pain and stimuli. The firing of your nerves makes part of this interrogation technique. They try to enhance this technique in such a way that they are able to use this technique even during the day when you are awake. But how do you react? By mumbling so they can record your answer with a hidden microphone? Or because they can read your mind and there is two-way communication? These studies from DARPA have shown that it is already possible. The Secret Service is doing things and can do things we can't. Karen Concoli is a neuroscientist and she is doing research in dreams and lucid experiments.
Even if you remember exactly what happened, it still doesn't feel like you're there anymore. When you're inside a dream, though, the world feels exactly like it does when you're awake. It feels exactly like this. What I'm talking about is lucid dreaming.
She has proven that two-way communication is possible between a dreamer and questioner. The dreamer reacts in her just published study with eye movements at questions and is able to answer with yes or no, even with the help of Morse signs. And that without knowing that the dreamer is answering.
And 90% of lucid dreams happen in REM sleep. When you go to sleep at the beginning of the night, you mostly have deep sleep, whereas most REM sleep happens at the end of the night.
This mechanism of the lucid dream makes part of the interrogation technique the Secret Service uses. With the help of low frequencies, the Secret Service is able to communicate with me. They use the right to intercept laterally. Now they do not break in on your computer, but into your brain. Formerly Minister of State Ollongren is completely informed about my situation. Another concept they work on is conditioning. With the penalty and reward system, they try to train a person into submission. It's all based on fear. First, they tried the clicker system on me, also used to train dogs.
Operant conditioning is based on the idea that we can increase or decrease a certain behavior by adding a consequence. For example, if a dog poops on a carpet, we can either provide reinforcement so the dog does it again, or punishment so the dog stops.
The interrogation is not intended to solve a crime. They try to creep into your life. They accused me for being involved in a serious crime, but that's not all that important. They are looking for a way, anyway, to bring fear to you, to force you. By repeatedly asking questions and making awful remarks, they are demotivating you, and if later on someone is asking you questions during your REM sleep and is presenting itself as a partner, you are more prepared to answer questions. The carrot and the stick. If you are in arousal, you are more honest and more direct. Sex as a means to let them speak. It's a well-known method of Russians who use beautiful women, man can do also, to come close to an interesting person. Sex relations between a target and a spy that continued for years, and not love, but information was all that matters. In mind control technique, sex drive is also usable. It is known in science that low frequencies trigger the production of dopamine. If something is pleasurable, your brain receives a substance that you like, that sharpens your concentration. Even to think at a situation in where you were rewarded before makes your body to produce those chemicals. Dopamine as fast kick and oxytocin as bonding agent. If answering a stealthy question is rewarded with a pleasureful chemical, you are automatically directed to give answers and dismiss lies or silence. You get hooked at yourself and you create a trusted bond with your interrogator. Instead of resistance, you create dependence with your own mind in a situation you actually should avoid. For the returning interrogator, an almost ideal situation, because more nights come with more questions, and during the night, when the drone has landed on your roof, you will answer them, in your own house, in your own bed. Okay, I hope you have followed me until here. Now I start with my personal story. We go back in time, 11 years, and I will read sometimes out of my book I have written. In 2011, I bought an old house in France, placed in a tiny village with a handful of citizens, in a mountain area. Beautiful scenery with mountain summits, wild rivers and a beech forest. My view was spectacular. Some years later I emigrated to that mountain house and tried to go along with the neighbors. I am familiar with the mountains. As mountaineer I climbed in whole Europe. My house gave me new possibilities. With an installation at the wall, I received internet and I wrote on a Dutch forum accurate stories about the Brexit debacle and the EU. Sometimes I even wrote forward-looking, and it was all correct. I was able to receive television with a disc, so I could follow Dutch news and French stations.
Deviens un irresponsable n'est plus un citoyen.
For the other part, my life was simple. I made my own bread, had a garden with veggies, and take care of my long-coated 155-pound mountain dog that used to work as a guard dog to shake off wolves. I had a good time in France. February 2017. Something curiously happened in my snow-rich, lonesome village. I was working with my car and suddenly a man and a woman were passing by with a dog. Not many passengers come along, and because my dog was visiting their dog, I started a conversation with them in French language. They looked at each other, the man gave a sign to the woman, and they told me that they in fact were Germans on holiday, and that they were camping in a village nearby. While the man showed me a map of the surrounding on his phone, the woman started making pictures with a big camera, one from the dog, but many of me. Maybe 10 images from all directions she turned around me. I found it strange, but could not see a clue. But the accent in the man's words was strange. And I started the conversation in the German language. Suddenly the woman whispered in French to the man to keep it short. The next day I visited the campsite with a tail. And soon I found the place where they have camped, but they were gone. Their French neighbor told me that he found them strange and that in fact they were French, speaking French, had a French car. The description from the two and the dog fitted precisely. French making pictures of me, the start of problems. After this meeting, a long time nothing special happened, and it was already out of my mind. Until, during a television broadcast with Dutch news, I suddenly noticed someone who brought my name. The TV show and presenter looked just like normal, speaking out his text. But between the lines I heard him say my name. Raymond? I was flabbergasted. Is this possible? The presenter speaks at me. Was I out of my mind? I forced me not to pay attention to it, but again and again I was addressed. Raymond? And I could see it was never lip sync. Something happened with the voice of the presenter. A layer of sound was hidden in the existing broadcast.
Multiplexing in network means multiple signals are combined together and thus travel simultaneously over one link.
How that multiplexing and subliminal messaging works, I don't know. During the time I was thinking I had a modified television set. But it makes more sense to realize that the satellite signal that was directed at my disk was accompanied with an additional sound layer. Again voices, and now hidden in a layer of sound. And no, there was nothing wrong with my perception, my life was regulated. A voice from a person can be artificially created in such a way that it is hard to distinguish the real voice from the artificial one. All you need is the AI program that you feed with many high-quality sound bites, and those are available from the news chairman. The results are superb. Even when you know how the real person sounds, you can be misled. Website mindu.eu, the stripe between the words. With the voice of known Dutch presenters, I received instructions to do things. A kind of a game started, a play. I had to do something, and when I followed the clue, they let me know how that went. It was never friendly, and there was never two-way communication. But I received during the TV program a message like, "Well done, Raymond." I had to examine my computer. I had to scan the room for hidden mics. I had to close the screens or to open them. And every night, same hour, I had to turn on the television. But before that, I had to take down all the power in the house. It was only allowed to have power on for the satellite and the television, but I had to shut off the fridge. It was bizarre, but I was also curious to what was happening here. It was exciting, unknown, and secret, and I received new information. Looking back, it was stupid that I followed the instructions, but at the time I thought it was a game, a social play. My house was secured with an alarm system and a control box. One day I received the order to check my alarm and I was flabbergasted because the internal battery was detached and those connections are really strong and the memory was cleared. Someone had entered my house during my walk with the dog and had broken my alarm and cleared his traces. I didn't talk about it with anyone, but I was convinced that I was not becoming illusional, but that I was dealing with a group that was able to do this kind of things. But why did they let me know this? Another day, a French old man from my village told me that strange people took place in the house of my neighbors. Dangerous people, he said. I didn't know what he mentioned and laughed about it. But his eyes remained serious. The house of my neighbors is placed close to that of mine and was in use by Belgians for the holidays. But suddenly their car was gone, the screenings were open, it looked like it was used, but the Belgians were not there. Other people were living in the house now, unknown people, and they never showed themselves to me. Some later I drove with my car to the supermarket, and suddenly a penetrating smell was hitting me in the car. I felt completely ill, sweat in my face, sick. It was not doable. I braked hard and stopped the car near the road, took my dog out and needed a half hour to remain calm again. I examined the car, especially the ventilation, but could not find anything strange. I went to the supermarket and returned home. I could hardly walk, and that continued for a week. The situation became dangerous. Outside, two Frenchmen discussed with each other. They didn't know that I could receive their conversation from my balcony. I heard them talk about an accident. Accident. Fragment Diary, March 2017. I go to the vet with my dog. The drive to the city is on a curved small mountain road. Regardless the time, it's a good sunny weather. With help of the television and presenter's voice, I received the instruction to drive with my car window open. Because I was afraid for another gas attack, I did that. On the quiet mountain road, just before a strong curve, men are working with branches. They are wearing orange suits. They are placed at two sides of the road, and at the moment I pass slowly one of them, a narco gas is sprayed into my open window. For a while I am completely out, dreaming. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, I don't know. It was delicious. Just before the curve I returned to conscious and I managed to stay with the car on the road. By this situation I was convinced that I needed to do something. I felt myself responsible for my dog, and if I didn't woke up before the curve, I was now laying with car and dog in the deep. I considered this as an attack from the French to me. When I later returned to my village, I see neighbors looking up and talking about an accident that did not take place. Words they will use again a year later. A few days later, the awful smell was in my house and it was alarming. It was the same gas as used in the car, a gas that influenced the signals to my muscles. It was a neurologic gas, a battlefield gas. I was unable to think, could hardly move, and instinctively flee to the kitchen. And suddenly, behind the open window with bars, there stood a man in the dark and he told me that they were the boss in France. Fragment Diary 22 April 2017. France, supermarket, Lidl. I wanted to buy a phone and a SIM card and some food. During the 45-minute ride, 4 cars were following my movements. They stopped when I stopped. I tried many supermarkets and when I left they were there again. I continued to the Lidl supermarket. I did some shopping there and waited in the row with the shopping basket. Behind me stood a small, bald-headed man, and suddenly I felt sick. I felt a strong urge to escape. I looked behind me and saw just that the bald man used a black straw and a small tube to blow a gas in my face. He directly put it aside in a black, small shoulder punch. Now I saw this. Another tall man, standing right in another row, showed me that he had a gun. It was placed in an armpit holder. The man behind me said to me, "Why are you visiting so many supermarkets?" I flee out the supermarket, left all the stuff behind, and returned home, without phone or food. The French started to communicate with me. "C'est nous," they said when they passed me in their car, window open. Regularly the same people in the same outfit, imitating a painter with a trouser full of paint stains. "C'est nous" became a meaningful sentence to me. I wanted to flee to the Netherlands. My existence in France became impossible, and I could not trust my car anymore. So I tried to rent a car. But at any situation, with any rental company, someone from the French Secret Service entered the room and prohibited to rent me a car. Very openly. Finally I had success. I was able to rent a Renault Clio for 1 month. We were agreed with the price. As we stood talking, a person from the secret agency came in, showed a badge and told the man not to rent me a car. The rental service was surprised, but also angry. "Bastards," he said. "It is already a hard time for me, but now he was not allowed to give me the car anymore." In the store where I usually bought my construction materials, they could not deliver me anymore. They were not able to provide me any service, they said. Another gas attack followed in my house. It was so strong that I am happy to survive, but it was extremely awful and gave me such a reaction that I could only make small turns in my house, standing on the spot. It was terrible, and even now I hardly can speak about it. It is written in more detail in my book. The source from this gas I could not find, but I managed to take a sample that I later presented to a friend. But more meaningful was that the Secret Service played a clever game. A game whereby I would end as the guilty one. And I felt in that trap with open eyes. And that went like this. They told me that the French found out what form of communication was used. And therefore, for me, it was not allowed to use a particular channel anymore. Do not use channel 1. So I looked TV at all channels except channel 1. But suddenly they ordered me to do just that. Put it on channel 1 was the message. And I fulfilled that. For sure I found it weird, but thought that they probably had more knowledge about why this had changed. And then it went wrong. I switched to channel 1 and saw a control room full with monitor screens and a man that looked up in reaction. Immediately I unplugged the cable from the receiver, but later on I got accused that I betrayed the technique to the French. I was a betrayer, and I felt guilty, but I literally did what they asked me to do. And that guilty feeling remained. And all that followed after this moment had to do with that moment in France where I turned the TV to channel 1. But now in retrospective I can look back and see. It was a method to put pressure at me, to let me feel guilty. Some years later they came with the accusation that I murdered the criminal landlord Hans. Probably to put me under pressure again. Because of that, I did not take the action that was needed, like telling my story. And could the Secret Service continuously abuse me in any way to practice on me? The French Secret Service presented themselves as new, but in reality they did the same as the Dutch. They worked together. But at that time I was forced to do something. They chased me out of France. Shops were unable to give me service. It was impossible to rent a car. I could not stay in my house because of the gas attacks, and my car was dismissed. With the help of our communication system, they told me that I had to seek shelter in the Netherlands. I had to return. And all was allowed. They told me that illegal actions were not, but clearly returning to the Netherlands was way more important than anything else. They told me that I was not the only one. Suddenly they presented it to me in a way that more people were ordered to return. We were a group. Some of them were stealing a car or hijacked one with a driver. It became almost a match. You could win points too. It looked like a really bizarre way to recruit. But in all cases, all contacts with the Dutch were virtual, presented on TV or internet, and fear was the base for doing things. Voice. For digital security you had a 10. Voice. You are not hired. Finally, I escaped to the mountains with dog and backpack, with little food and insufficient material that I quickly packed. At the moment I left the door, 2 neighbors told me that I could leave the dog behind. In that way I had a chance. Huh? During my trip through the mountains, it is still winter, I try to stay out of the hands from well-trained persons that try to intercept me in the forest and the mountains. What followed was a huge second height. In my book I am more specific. With modern technology, drones, men in camouflage suits, red light points at weapons, a circling helicopter, a water source that was completely sour, electronic sensors that betrayed my position. Sometimes my dog recognized a trap and pulled me hard on the rope around it. But it was very difficult to leave the head valley. In the mountains there is always one road, and that road is easy to check. It is not possible for me to leave France with my dog, and after a week I returned to my mountain house. This was 2017. The Dutch television showed several years later a series in where hunters from the Secret Service were hunting down recruits. But this was real and much more dangerous. Against my will and without signing anything or agreement, I was now situated in a forced recruitment. Finally, I started hitchhiking to town. Well, I knew that what I was going to do was not the purpose, but to get away unseen with a huge dog from 155 pounds in the wintertime, it was impossible. And performing criminal acts, I do not want to do that. Immediately a car stopped with a woman and a man. They asked me where I wanted to go and drove me up to the train station in a major town. I tried to find a hotel, but no one wanted me with my dog. But suddenly all was possible. I had a great room, my dog was okay, they gave me great service. I'm not sure what happened. I went out to find a place to eat. It is late and I arrived at a small Vietnamese restaurant. It's nearly closing time and I am alone. But soon another man arrives with beard and he sits behind me and asks something to eat too. The next day I went to the train station and I knew I was in the picture now. I wanted to buy a ticket and waited in a row. At least 8 young men and women are standing behind me. But the following moment I looked over my shoulder. I saw a woman, aged 40, with pitch black hair, standing direct behind me. This woman I saw before in another town over 130 kilometers distance. And now she stands, suddenly, with another woman directly behind me. It looked like that all the others let her go first, and that they knew each other. The moment I turned my head, I could see her taking a huge needle out of her jacket. With that, she tried to hit me. Quickly, I turned my backpack in her direction and stepped out the line, with my dog on the leash. Over the cord, she did not touch me. Standing in the fast train to the Netherlands, I see the same man from the restaurant again, with brown leather shoes and his nicely trimmed beard. He has something made out of plastic in his hand and aimed it to me. He tells me that there is nothing against it in development. There is no antidote, he said in French. Direct I feel a tickling sensation in my lips and my tongue and throat, and that sensation will remain for 2 weeks. I'm afraid and try to rebook my ticket to enter the first class, but that is not possible. I asked the police that is passing by in the running train to investigate the situation, and indeed they searched a man from the group, but they do not find anything. The train Grande Vitesse runs to the border and I seek help by a girl, a student, and tell her my story with broken voice. She is recording that with her iPhone. I'm in panic and ask her to bring the story to a Dutch newspaper, and she promises to do that. During the recording we are standing near the doors. A man passes and he looked very aggressive to me. Instinctively, I thought that it was someone from the French Secret Service. Later on, they accused me that I involved this young student from Belgium and that she is now murdered because she knows too much. I felt very guilty. I even cried about it, but now I would ask a journalist to examine this. And so I arrived in the Netherlands, where I soon entered the hospital with very severe stomach inflammation, and where I could start with my revalidation in a rental house 1 month later. In that same Dutch village, I had my first encounter with a man that presents himself as my contact and continuously stays in my neighborhood. In the hospital, he stands suddenly without a sign in front of me. With a huge shoulder case he used to trace my iPhone. "You see, we can find you back anywhere, up to 4 meters, he said. Later on, I see him furiously knocking his head the moment I wanted to use a prepaid phone, while standing on a square. And also in other towns in the Netherlands I will see this man again, sometimes hidden as carpenter or as fisherman standing near the river. He is not presenting me a clever representation, and he does not succeed to interact with me. In that same rental house was also a television, and while I was doing something on my iPhone, suddenly the voice from a well-known presenter told me that my phone was not turned off. This was a great surprise to me. I did not expect to see the same technology from France here again. I had to swipe over the screen to close the phone, she said. Honestly, this was my first and recently bought iPhone, and I did not know how to do that. She friendly explained it to me again with her voice. Everything that happened in France continued here in Holland, and I received information again. Of almost everything in my story are images, tickets, pictures, and witnesses. How I return to France and eventually leaves my house with a helicopter and hitchhike to Switzerland. That story you can hear in following episodes. And please help me to link my podcast if you think it's an interesting story to bring others in contact with it. I am not creating my story to help the secret agency with their mission, because we need to discuss with each other the use of mind control. That is not something we can trust the secret agency to do. Mind you.
Today, the mind is the new frontier.
Sergeant Raymond Shaw.
Path ahead is not without obstacles and risks. For instance, ethics and privacy and data ownership. All must be addressed for the emerging neurotech domain.
Computers are better than we are as human beings, but the special part of it is behind that system.
Yes.
Listen.